All right. So today we're going to just be talking about web scraping in JavaScript. Um, like we were talking about earlier, I think a lot of web scraping is being done in Python these days, but there are quite a few use cases for web scraping in JavaScript. And with more JavaScript being used on the back end, I think it's become more prevalent. So today's talk, I'm just going to walk you through some use cases, some of the libraries that are being used, and then we'll do some quick tutorials, like a little overview of how you can use some of these tools and some quick examples of them in action. So what is web scraping? Web scraping, it's the act of extracting data from a website. Basically, the data that's being displayed, you're by programmatic means taking that data and then using it in your own way. It can be downloaded, it can be output into a JSON file, it can be added to a database, you can download it in CSV form. So pretty much anything you can think of, you can do with that data once you've scraped it. That also brings up ethical concerns. We were talking about that before the presentation, and definitely when web scraping, you want to be cognizant of the fact that the data that you're taking in is data that people may have out publicly, but you may not be authorized to use that data in your own way. So before doing any web scraping, you want to make sure that you've checked the site's, I believe it's in the robots.txt, where it'll say what use cases you're allowed to use it for. And some sites actively will be fighting web scraping. So there's also that. I mean, there's some sites are going to be looking for repeated attempts to access the site. There's also anything behind a paywall is probably not scrapable. You could scrape it, but you're not going to want to legally. If you're paying for it, you probably can't scrape that data unless you have like the explicit consent of the owner. So you want to keep that in mind. But there's a lot of different uses for web scraping. Marketing lead generation, people will scrape things like the Yellow Page websites, any like local listing sites. They'll scrape them for email addresses, contact phone numbers and names, business owner names. Pretty much anything you can think of in that case that you can contact business owners or create a mailing list. They use them on price comparison sites. So, any place you're going to see like prices compared. So a site that may say like, oh, okay, Amazon has this item for $25, Walmart is listing it for $30, and Target has it for $37. A lot of those sites are using web scraping to show the current price of that product. Also, e-commerce sites very similarly will sometimes even use web scraping to scrape the product descriptions. So, rather than, handwriting all the product descriptions, they're going to scrape the descriptions from a site and then use that for their product descriptions. Real estate, I was talking about that beforehand. That's kind of what got me back into looking into web scraping. Was there was a freelance job that had come up that involved scraping commercial real estate websites and then funneling the listings into one site, which again may have had some legality issues, but on real estate sites they do it quite a bit. I think even some real estate agents will have data scraped from the MLS and import it into emails and have a whole bunch of different use cases on their websites for that. Machine learning as well. When you're building data sets, Much bigger in Python, not as much in JavaScript, but people are using web scraping to scrape historical data or really any data that you can use for machine learning or academic research as well. Yeah. And so common tools used, there's in JavaScript quite a few different libraries right now, and this is just a handful of the ones that are available. There's definitely more. Cheerio is it's a implementation of jQuery on the server. So like all of the methods that you can use in jQuery to access DOM elements are pretty much available on the back end when you're scraping the HTML of the site. I have an example of web scraping with Cheerio coming up, so if you're interested in that, it's definitely a really powerful library. Puppeteer is a browser automation library. You can do some scraping. I would say, like from my experience putting this together, Puppeteer is super powerful when it comes to automating tasks like navigating a website programmatically. The scraping part of it for me was a little bit more difficult, but I also feel like as we go through, I'll introduce you to some of the documentation. And the Puppeteer documentation is a little bit more dense than the Cheerio documentation, but I guess it depends on how you learn. So Selenium is another library. It's really big in the Python community. They do have a JavaScript implementation of it. I did not use it yet because it still seemed like Puppeteer was the go-to when it comes to JavaScript automation, but I'm sure it's great. The one thing I did notice about Selenium is that it does automate multiple browsers. So with Puppeteer, it's like a headless Chrome implementation. You can use it standard as well. It's Chromium, so you can choose to have it headless or not headless, but it's still implementing Chromium under the hood. Whereas Selenium, you can automate Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Internet Explorer, and Edge. Then there's Request. Request is just really a simple HTTP client. There's definitely a lot to Request that I didn't really dive into. It's a deprecated library, so they're not currently developing on it, but it does seem like people are still using it quite a bit. So I wouldn't say don't use it, but from what I found, like doing just a cursory overview of it, it's not as full featured as say Cheerio or Puppeteer. It may be something that you could use. Like a lot of these tools, you kind of can use them together. So you may use Request in some situations with Cheerio or with Puppet. I can't really see why you'd use it with Puppeteer because you're already in the browser with that. But yeah, I'm sure with you can use it along with other tools, and I'm sure it's quite powerful. And now there's Appify, and Appify is a little different from everything I saw. I didn't really dive into it because for me, I just wanted to get the basics of web scraping and kind of down to like bare metal. So these other libraries are more, the bare minimum that you need for scraping, whereas Appify is like a complete web scraping platform. There's paid plans. There's a free tier, but like, you can pay for more seats, and it looks like something you would use in more of a corporate setting. They also did recently release an open source library. I didn't really dive into that one yet. It's something I would like to in the future, but like currently I was more focused on just the simple libraries that allow you to scrape websites. So that's, and then some examples. We kind of already went through this, but like, Google is a really good example of web scraping, right? Because it's the ultimate web scraper. you know, constantly indexing all internet pages, right? So, well, maybe not all of them, but the majority of web pages that allow it to index them, it's indexing them. And so, like, you don't really think about Google as a web scraper, but really that's what it's doing, right? It's going through, it's pulling out all the pertinent data, and then it's running machine learning tasks on it, right? It's pulling out like all of the information, and it's associating it. It's what, it does a lot more behind the scenes, obviously, than just simple web scraping. But on the surface, it's really just scraping data from all these web pages and then categorizing them. Link previews was another one that I didn't really think about it right off the bat when I started looking into web scraping, but it makes a lot of sense. When you go to a website and say, like, on Slack, when I put in the Google Meet address, it takes that address and then it goes and it looks and brings back a screenshot, right? Or brings back an image and a quick description of that website, right? So I have a library or it's not really a library, it's a repository where they implement some of the tools that we're going to go over, and they use it to generate link previews. And I think if you have a chance to look at this repository, even if you don't really mess around with the other stuff, it's definitely worth looking at, because the way that the code's really concise, and it gave me a really good idea of how people are using these tools in production code. And then we went over, price comparison sites or common use travel sites, or shopping sites where they list prices and products from multiple distributors. Some job boards. I know there are actually some job boards that are just like scraping data and reposting data from like monster.com and things like that. Another thing to think about, though, when it comes to web scraping, is that a lot of these sites are actively trying to discourage web scraping. There's things like, the I'm not a robot, boxes that you have to check, and the human checkers. Those things are going to be kind of hard for you to get around. So, like, it seems like they're pretty simple, but really what those things are doing are tracking your mouse throughout the app. They're doing things behind the scenes that you're not really aware of. So like when you're automating a browser with something, and you'll see it when we get into Puppeteer, it's going to be really hard to make that appear like it's a human using it. I can't think of how you could do it. You'd have to use some sort of weird timeouts and things. But obviously there's people that are much more advanced at this stuff than I am. But I personally couldn't see investing the time just to get around stuff like that. So, and then on top of that, there's also they're looking for excessive traffic from a specific IP address. So if you look into services like Appify, they're cycling proxy servers, so your traffic isn't coming from the same IP address. So you're going to have to do things like that too. If you're really trying to do web scraping on any kind of large scale, you're going to have to cycle through proxy servers and make sure you're not consistently hitting these endpoints from the same IP addresses, because they're going to block you. So that's the end of the slideshow. I'm just going to run through a few of the examples, and then we'll go from there. Did you have a question, Andre?
Another restriction I've seen in web scraping is the amount of requests per second you make to specific page. So if you are like hitting constantly a same URL, you definitely be banned
Yeah.
because it's obvious that it's a bot.
Well, exactly, and that's the kind of thing, is it's. I mean, if you think about it from like a security standpoint, okay, they're looking for bots, and then if you're really making bad calls and you're just hammering their server, they're gonna shut you down because it could appear like it's a DDoS attack. So anytime you're really dealing with a decent site, I would assume you're not going to be able to get much done. But if you're like you can go and you can scrape some data from Amazon. Like if you wanted to do like one of the things I was thinking of was like, hey, maybe scrape like all the cocktail websites and find the cocktails that are mentioned the most across all sites. Like something like that. That there's probably not a lot of like legal issue. You're not relisting their recipes. You're not, you're just doing some like data, manipulation, and that's really about it. So in a situation like that, I think you don't have a whole lot to worry about. But if you're using it for commercial use, you definitely
Yeah,
want to make sure you're paying
and
attention.
it depends a lot of the kind of data you are creating.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and personal data really is where you got to watch out. Anytime you're scraping anything that could be personal or, um, like, say a company's, you know, like, I mean, I guess you wouldn't be scraping trade secrets, but anything that specifically is that company's IP, you definitely don't want to get into. So, here's this code right here is just a simple example of the request library. So you import request, and then you call a get on it, and it's a basic get call. So right here, all I'm doing is I'm gonna log out the body of the website. So this site is a website that's built for scraping. It's basically like you can go on, you can scrape all the data. It even has some tutorials, I believe, that are attached to it. So like we can follow the link, and you'll see it. So this is the site here. It's just a list of countries in the world, and there's quite a few. Like a lot of the examples will.
Uh, are you? Uh, we're not seeing any slide showing or screen sharing.
Oh,
You, you haven't shared it yet.
I'm sorry. Okay. So here's a.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the site, and you'll see it's just a really basic list of countries in the world, right? So most of the examples that you'll find of just like basic scraping are going to have you scrape, say, Wikipedia articles or something like that. Things that you're totally fine scraping, or there's some sites like this that allow you to scrape or are built to be scraped. So the HTML is really easy to scrape as well. Like the class names are concise. They're really easy to find. So like on this one with requests, we're not really doing much, but we're gonna just log out the entire body of the website.
Okay.
So
Could you zoom in a little bit your
sure.
screen so we can see?
Is that better?
Better, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I forgot it's a large monitor. Okay. So we'll run this one.
Given that the domain name is scrape this site.
Yeah, scrapethissite.com. So it's like in the name, you're pretty safe. So we just logged it out, and I mean, you could save it to a file if you wanted, but here you can see like it has all of the HTML tags, all the JavaScript tags. Um, Now these sites are really simple. So anything with with a lot of JavaScript or like a front end library, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And that's when you really start getting into, and you'll see with Puppeteer, you're making async calls, because all of this stuff is, you're going to be waiting for the data to load before you're going to scrape it, right? Because you can't scrape something if it hasn't loaded yet. So, this is the most basic. It's just taking the entire body of the site and it's logging out everything. So, if you really wanted to, you could save it to a file. It's not super useful, but gives you like a basic idea of what you can do with it. Now, the next one is Puppeteer. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So, as you can see, like, you import Puppeteer and then you make an async call. And this async function, once you get going, you'll see. So this is, you're implementing a browser and then you're launching it. So this Puppeteer.launch is actually going to open the browser. Now we're getting into browser automation, and so it gives you the choice, headless. If you were to choose true in that Boolean, it's not going to actually open the browser. Like, you won't see it. There'll be no feedback. It'll just output what you're waiting for. It won't give you a browser or any sort of like visual aid to it. So I chose to do it false because I think it's actually really cool, like, to see it. But if you're running it on a server, like, in production, you're not going to be popping up browser windows or anything like that. Most of these are going to be on a server, and you're going to have an API that it hits, and then it runs the scraping job and then comes back, or it's going to be some sort of cron job that runs, in the background.
Also, opening the browser will slow down the process.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so in terms of for learning, I think it's super cool to watch this, this browser automation thing work. But like, yeah, in a production environment, or even like if I was running it on a development server, I probably wouldn't be like popping up browser windows or doing any of that. It's just going to be running headless all the time. So, so all these are async await calls. You're awaiting here. This is the page, so it's going to open a new page. And we're using this Puppeteer.launch. We've created this variable, and now we're using it here, and we're going to call new page on it. And then that's going to be our page from here on out. We're going to work with that. So then here we're going to open our URL, so to scrape this site, and we're waiting for that. This next one, we're creating a selector. So created a variable called choose, and this is going to be a selector from the site. So if we go in, we can look. It's a link. So what I did on this one, because it's browser automation, I went back to the base URL. And so this is what you would start with. And you'll see when we pop open the browser and we run this code that it's going to start with the base site. And then from there, I'm automating the browser to run through, clicking on the element with this selector, right? So here what I did, it's an A tag, and it has the attribute of an href, and this is what it's equal to. So it's looking for an A tag with that href, right? So once it finds that, so I've created that, but then it's waiting until that selector is available. Once that selector is available, then it's running page.click. And what page.click is going to do, and you'll see, it actually clicks the element on screen. So for navigating through things where you need multiple steps, like if you have a login, like that was trying to implement it on one of my React sites, um, but at the time I wasn't as well versed on it, so it was a little bit more difficult, and the async await calls were kind of tripping me up. But you can input data into a form, click submit, and then wait for the browser to load the next page, and then do something else. So here you'll see, I'll run it, and we'll get an idea of what actually happens when you run that Puppeteer.
Okay. The npm library is Puppeteer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll put a link into. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm launching on the wrong screen here. So you see it ran through, and it clicks the different elements. So it was opening on the wrong screen here. Let me see if I can run it again and get it back over here. And then it outputs. Like what I had to do was just output the names of the countries. So pretty basic use case, but we'll run it one more time and I'll make sure.
Actually, for a project, the single project, I mean, yeah, I hit an API endpoint to get the country names and city names.
Yeah.
I could have scraped a site like this and get that, but
Well, and it's different, and that's the interesting thing about web scraping too is that like if depending on what you look at, like some people, like I know there's like a few videos that I watched, and this was before I was even putting this together, where one of the guys who is a YouTube teacher, he was saying like to always look for an API, because if there's an API that you can access, like, and you're scraping this data, well, it doesn't make any sense. They may not have a publicly available API, but if you can like access the API where they're getting the data to display on their site, you should look for that first. And that, that makes sense. But I don't know if that's web scraping. I mean, to me, that's just calling an API. It's a little different. It's, but at the end goal, if your end goal is just to get the data, then that it's all the same, right? I mean, then you should be looking for the API, right?
yeah, it's we are just collecting the data from the API, and you're not presenting it in a different way or something like that. I think it's just another way of web scraping.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I just like for my use cases, I was trying to learn about it. So it's like I already know how to call an API. I mean, some of the other like things are a little bit more interesting. Maybe like how to find the hidden APIs is an interesting way.
It's just a legal way to web scrape.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
they authorize you to see and how to see.
Well, what he was talking about was less. I think they were less than legal. It was like, say a company has a website that's like public facing, and they also have like an iPhone app, and they also have an Android app, right? And they're all displaying that data, so they probably have an API on the back end that's serving that data. So if you can find those API web points or endpoints and then call those APIs, and just take that data and dump it into your database, as opposed to like doing something like this where you're actually like scraping the data off, a loaded website, then you're just skipping the step. It's, it doesn't really make it any more legal, but it saves you the trouble of having to like run, Puppeteer and Cheerio and all that. You're still getting the data in the end, but it's interesting.
Companies do sell you keys to access their APIs.
Yeah.
And to access their data and to use their data.
Oh yeah.
So since you are paying, since it's not something that's for you're you have a kind of a contract with them to use their data.
Oh yeah. Well, that's
So then there is there's a legality there that you are legally scraping their data.
yeah. Well, and that's in the situation of a publicly available API, something where you can pay for access to the API. But I mean, there's also data that like companies don't sell. Like, so Instagram is a perfect example. They do have a publicly available API, but apparently getting access to it is like not very easy. Um, and so then there's other situations where like, oh, okay, so they don't, maybe it's a company that doesn't have like a publicly available API. Say like McDonald's has, an API that they use to run their menu boards, um, their website, and you wanted that data. You wanted the data coming from that API, like, you know, the menu items and the price of those menu items. Well, say you found that API. That's kind of web scraping and you're able to get access to it. It's still probably not very legal, right? Because like they're not explicitly allowing you to use that data. Um, so I mean, it's an interesting like in between. You never know. Like there's so many like gray areas and weird things that people do with data online. That I mean, I think like something like this is more of a fun project, but whether I would use it in production, definitely for something like link previews, because I don't think that would ever be an issue. Where somewhere where you're just like maybe taking an automated screenshot, um, and then building a basic description of a site so someone who's about to follow that link knows what they're going to. I don't think too many sites are going to have an issue with that, but you know, definitely something like maybe a price comparison site or something where you're taking their data and using it in your own way and displaying it. You're kind of going to be in in an area they probably aren't going to like what you're doing with their data. So we'll look at this one more time. I'm just going to run that Puppeteer
Okay.
one more time and try and make sure it's on the other browser. I'll bring it over right away. Okay. So see, it definitely slows down. Okay. So you see what happens there is it waits for that first page to load, and I'll bring it up. So it waits for that first page to load, and then what I did was, if you use your dev tools, go. You can go in and you can find the element in the code, and so I found that, and so here you see it's like it's an A tag. It didn't have any classes on it. Like I could have used this H3 here and selected this page title H3, and then use the children, children of that to click on that. But I just
But
figured it was easy.
the next title will have the same parent classes.
Yeah,
It,
well, that was
you have the page and the page title too.
yeah, that was the
Then
problem is that they're all similar. So you kind of have to figure out something that's unique about them. And so I figured, well, that href, the link there is always going to be unique. So, I just went for the A tag, and then I looked for the attribute that matched it. So, like in here, you can see it's an A tag with the attribute href that's equal to, /pages /simple, and that matches.
but, but you could have, for example, get all of the page titles
Yeah.
uh, and look through them and go inside those pages.
Oh yeah, and then scrape each one too. Like, and that I mean that's the thing is so you can like if you look through the Puppeteer documentation, I mean you can do like like it has any control you can think of on the browser. You can go back, you can go forward, um, you can do pretty much anything you would do if you're clicking through it yourself. So,
Yeah, my question was in other way. So you get all the pages, all the titles,
mhm.
and you you look through each other, but you don't like go back. You scrape one page,
Mhm.
finish scraping, and let go to the loop and go to the next
Yeah,
page,
the next page.
etc., etc. Does it work like that, or you have like to
Um,
go back and start
I
and
think you could do it. So, and you'll see with Cheerio. Cheerio for me was a little bit easier because you can you could do that. Like so, what you could do with puppeteers, you could probably build out the because you can use them together, right? So you could probably build out that array, like so you could build out an array of links to each of those, right? And then you can one by one loop through them, scrape that site, go to the next one, loop through it, scrape that site, go to the next one, scrape that site. Um, but I think I don't know how you would do it with just Puppeteer. I'm sure there's a way. I mean, these things are like each one of these tools has a ton of different features, so I'm sure it's pretty easy to do without having to like go back and because you could definitely automate it to go back after you
yes,
scrape it, but like
but
it's much more efficient to do it that way.
yeah, it's time.
Yeah,
It's time.
yeah. So I mean, this one was a basic, basic like example of how you would scrape, but it's kind of like you saw from there, like all these little examples get my mind rolling, like yours, like okay, well, where else? How could I use it to do this? And then how do I build it? Like I'm a fan for me of going in, like finding the examples in the documentation, running them, and then messing around with all the different options and figuring out like, okay, so I'm gonna wait for this selector and then I'll run this and then, like, okay, how can I combine these tools? And probably in the next day or two I'll have to do what you just said and use Cheerio to scrape the pages and Puppeteer to build out the list of pages or you know so that's pretty much Puppeteer. You can see how powerful it could be if you can just do this basic thing, but like think about on top of that, you can get through like a login screen or click any buttons you need and automate any tasks that you can think of in the browser. I mean, it pretty much would enable you to scrape data from almost any site.
With Puppeteer, so you go to Amazon
Mm-hmm.
and you can you log in? You
Oh
pass
yeah,
your credentials and all the stuff?
yeah. Oh definitely. Now I mean, I'm sure like if
Like,
you think
not like sending the JSON to the server, but like filling up the form on the
yeah.
page.
Oh, that's it. Totally can like that's the example I was trying to build out with my site was just like I built a cocktail like website in React and it had a search bar. So basically you click the first link, you log in, um, and then it takes you to the search bar with all the cocktails loaded. And then you should type something in. So like I had it typing in like, oh, vodka, and then it would give you all, it hits the search button, runs the search, and gives you all the vodka cocktails. The only thing that I was running into was because of the fact that it was using React, like the loading of the cards was like the async call on that was screwing me up, and I was like just having so much trouble getting the data from those cards that
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I had something for
Yeah.
the presentation. I didn't want to mess with it for too long, but yeah, you can do any of those things.
Because I was thinking these tools can also be helpful for front-end testing.
And that's what I think they bill it as. Like Selenium too, it doesn't really say that it's a web scraping tool. It's just used by a lot of people to web scrape. They kind of describe it as an automation tool for browser testing. So you can use it as a tool to test like your website. You find your bugs, and I'm sure there's a ton of ways you could think of to like make sure that oh, I click on this button and then this happens, and then I can find this tag, and if I can't, then return test failed or
Exactly,
or something
because
along
there
those
are
lines.
so many scenarios that it's impossible to test them all by hand.
Oh yeah. Well, and even like in some of those situations when you're doing things and you're waiting for JavaScript to load, your tests might pass like on when you're writing tests, but in the browser it's taking forever or it's not being displayed properly, and so you couldn't click on it. It seems like it would be a huge help. All right, so let's move on from Puppeteer and we'll take a look at Cheerio. And so I use the same site for the Cheerio example. The one
Okay.
thing about Cheerio is it doesn't have like a built-in HTTP library for making HTTP calls. So I use Axios with it, and really it's just all the tutorials kind of use Axios, and it's a library I've used in the past. So really the only thing you're using it for is to run a get call to the URL, and then from there everything else is in Cheerio. So the only other thing I use on this one is a file system, and that's because it's just creating a JSON file in the end, and that's what it's going to
Okay.
output here. So
And
basically, I'm sorry,
also
go
I
ahead.
see the jQuery aspect of.
Yeah, it's like if you use jQuery, it's like really comfortable. And that's the one thing I liked about it is like that was like the first week in my boot camp was jQuery, and like it clicked.
I've never used jQuery, so it's
Oh,
like,
really? Yeah, I mean, once you're like now, I think most of jQuery, like there's not a whole lot of reasons to use it. You can use like all the selectors are pretty easy to use. You don't have to do all this like have to load a library for it. But if you use it, like it makes the syntax is so simple that like for me, it's really easy to just jump in. So basically, what you're doing here is we're creating a variable data, and it's just taking the results of this get call to this URL, and then we're loading the data here as a dollar sign. So it takes it. I believe behind the scenes, I think it converts it into a string. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that it's using
I
like
think it's more than a string. It's easier to any library to go through like a JSON or an XML, something like
yeah.
that. If,
Well, I know you can convert it to XML too.
I
I
think
know that
behind the
that's an
scenes it
option.
converts to JSON or XML. No, I don't
Well,
think they will convert it to a string just because it's harder to.
to work with, yeah. Well, and that's what I thought too. Is like it's because it seems like something you would totally want JSON for, but you still have to like convert it to JSON in the end. So
Yeah, they won't give you for free, but behind
no,
the scenes they will
it's
work. I
probably
think
doing
they
that.
most likely work with a JSON or an XML or even
Yeah.
HTML because that it's easier to navigate through.
Yeah. So here, what we're doing is we're just basically going through this data, and it's looking for a selector. And the selector here, I use the class of country, and so we'll go back to this site again, and you can see here, right? If we look through the HTML and we look at the whole country, let's see if we can get that in focus here. Okay, so here we go. So now we have just the entire country here, and you'll see that class, right? There's the country class. So I use that because I'm pulling a list of all the countries, right? So in here, I'm going through, I'm creating a variable called list items, and we're just getting all all of the items that match that country selector, that country class. So then we're creating an empty array here, and then we're just looping through with a dot each, right? So then we're creating from that list items array, or list items, we're creating individual objects with a name, an info, and actually don't have the capital in there yet. So right now we just have name and then the country info. And so down here, it's going through and it's looking at that element, and the element that it's looking through is going to be that country. So the children of that, it's going to look for country dash name. So if we look in the HTML here and look at the CSS, we expand that. So if we expand it, we can see right here we have an H3. It has a class of country dash name. And then under here it's Andorra, right? So that's the country name that we're targeting. And this one's a little rough. Like I didn't really take time to clean up the strings. But if you look here too, we got the country.info. It's a div that's the children of that as well. So you can look through here, and so here's that country.info, and it's going to give you all this stuff: the capital, population, and then the country area, right? And then so that's all we're looking for there. And then it's gonna it takes that and it's pushing each one as an object into that country's array, right? So right here we created that empty array. And it's creating those objects, and then it's pushing them into that country array. Now here it's just logging that, and then we're writing a file, and that file is countries.json. It's converting that string to JSON, and then we have an little error handling, but not much. So then it'll console log successfully written to file, and that's it. And then we just call that here. So I'll run that one, and so you can see, like, I didn't really clean up the data that much, but you can see you have, like, the name is Haiti, and then you look down and you have, like, capital. I mean, that would have been, like, pretty trivial to do with pretty much any, a library, or you can do it with, what is that? It's slipping my mind right now, but you can, cleaning up the data, the strings is not too difficult. You can also go through and you can use it like standard jQuery, or even if you didn't want to use like the jQuery syntax.
Let us see the countries.json.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So here's the countries.json that it outputs as well. So it's a little easier to read, but it's still like you'd have to remove all this empty space and the ends,
Yeah, it could have inserted the line breaks instead of printing the /n.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you can be more precise with it. Like I said, I wanted to make sure that I hit all of the different libraries that we got a chance to look at them. But definitely, if it was something that I was going to take a bunch of time on,
yeah,
you could pretty easily clean it all up and have it, create like a really clean JSON file. So here, this is another one. This is just going to get the capital by itself as well.
But I understand that, but there are those special characters that are usually hidden that slash n, for example, that it's a new line.
Yeah.
Uh, I was surprised to see the in the file
Yeah,
in the
no, and that's the one thing about this one that was confusing because like on like you saw with the puppeteer, so you can get the inner text, and I'm sure there's a better way to do it in Cheerio. I can't remember the way to do it in jQuery, but like you can't because it's like an implementation of jQuery. Just using like the standard like inner text on it wouldn't work. So I'm sure there's a better way that I'm just overlooking, but
okay.
I'm
Maybe the way you get the inner text in jQuery, I never use it, so I have no idea.
yeah. It's been a long time since I'd used it up until this, so it's like on this one you see here because we targeted it. I targeted it a little bit better. Now, like with the capital, it prints out just Budapest, right? So
Yeah,
like
it's
you see you
much.
can target better. Like on this, I think part of it was because I was just targeting a div, right?
Okay.
Instead of like drilling down and going through the children of that div and targeting the immediate tag that had that text in it,
Yeah,
right?
it makes sense.
So like with this one, you can see it's like I kind of had to drill down a little bit more to get it. So I
Yeah,
made I went through the children of that div into the country capital, and you could do that for all of those. I'm sure like the country name was probably just a bad selector. You could probably get deeper into it and get a more concise like output. So, but I just wanted to make sure that it had like a good example of how to run it, and you'll see like this one now it's updated with the capital, right? So it's right in that JSON, and that one's like much cleaner. So you can go back and you can do that with all of them.
yeah,
But I mean
yeah,
that's it just like it gives you a little bit like a starting point, like kind of an idea what these tools are capable of, and like my next step for this would be to like use them in concert. Like, how can I combine Puppeteer and Cheerio to like get all the data that I want and easily, right? Because Puppeteer is a little bit more like the automation was really easy, but the scraping side of it was not as simple as Cheerio. Cheerio is really simple to scrape. So now it's just a matter of like, well, okay, how do you take that, take Puppeteer's automation and then combine it with Cheerio? And I'm sure like with a little like a single Google search, you could find a bunch of different examples of how to use them together. Because I know a lot of things that I saw were like, oh, okay, yeah, you can use Puppeteer to automate the browser and then Cheerio to scrape. So like if you're looking for something that say has a login and you want to scrape something behind it, okay, well you use Puppeteer to automate that portion of it and then you scrape the data with Cheerio. So just simple things. One thing that was really cool about Puppeteer is it also has a screenshot feature, and let's see, maybe I can bring up the docs here and see. So if you look, let's see, I think it's in page. Yeah, so there's a screenshot feature. So like you can just have it navigate to any page and then just take a screenshot and save it, right? So you could like along the lines of testing, you could use it to check the UX of your site, right? Have it navigate a site, take screenshots through you know, your UX flow, right? Or, I mean, there's like, to me, that's like another thing where it's like, oh, the possibilities, like how I could use that. I could probably use it in a million different scenarios. Like I could just think of different things to use it for if I wanted to. But that's what got me thinking about that. Like the link preview was it seemed like a simple way to create link previews. It's like okay,
well, as all tutorials, they are just showing the tip of the iceberg.
oh yeah.
You
Well, and this
you have
these
so many things to do. You can do that. It's impossible to anyone to show you everything.
yeah. Well, and that's I mean, I would love to like really dive into it. I know there's some really cool libraries, like especially with Python. There's some really cool projects and libraries, and there's a project that I was looking at that um, uses Beautiful Soup, I think, along with Selenium to notify you when campsites are available in national parks, right? So like you set up a watch, it you run it on a server and it just like checks these national park sites for open availability and then sends you an email or a text when when a
Uh,
campsite's available. It's pretty cool. But
uh, I built something similar in
yeah.
Python, but targeting an API of flights.
Mhm.
So for the flight, I selected some flight dates, some flight destinations, and it will tell me in the next 6 months when will be the lowest price and something. But
Oh,
and send me to my mail information.
that's awesome. Yeah, I've had a few things that like I wanted to, and that's why I just keep like finding these things that like involve web scraping where I'm like, oh man, that would be really cool to do, and then I dive down the rabbit hole and I'm like, it's a little bit too much work. I don't really want to like I don't really care about getting a campsite that much, but then it keeps popping up, so I figure it's about time. So here's this one. If you want to take a look at like a really interesting use for these libraries, it was this repository. It's a link preview library, and like I'll preface it with I don't know who this person is, but they're obviously using it in production. It's the saverdid.me site. I didn't even look at it. I just looked at the code. Um, but like if you look at this, like they have some things that they've done to like work around cores, which is like another issue that you might have to think about. Um, and I'm trying to see where info
Mm.
was.
That,
I don't think this was it. It was,
in TypeScript, right?
yeah, it's all TypeScript. And so like Cheerio is totally built with totally has the types built in. Um, okay, so here you see like I think this one was it's using Axios and then import scrape site data and
Will
so they
you be
have
will you be sharing this repo?
yeah I'll share the link right now actually I'll drop it in the chat that way
Yeah.
I don't forget because yeah it's a cool one to look over like I thought the code was really well written and it really made me think about like how you could use these because I think they're using Puppeteer. There's like a Puppeteer stealth library that they're using as well. That was kind of interesting. And I think that's to get around like being blocked and things like that. Did that come through? It didn't. Oh, okay, good. Okay. All right, you got that. Yeah, I would look through it too. Like I thought it was really great, and I want to see if I can like use it in a project just to see how it works, like with other code running. Because oh right, yeah, and I think they're using Next.js with it too. There was more to it, but I'm not exactly sure where. But I would look through it and check it out because they were using pretty much everything. I don't know if they were using Cheerio, but
Uh,
let's
here
see.
they're using here. I'm looking at the
Oh yeah, they have
package.
Cheerio. Yeah,
I'm looking at the package JSON, and there's Cheerio.
yeah. And then they have
And
see there's like
yeah,
these there's a Puppeteer extra plugin ad blocker and stealth. I
uh,
don't I didn't look into those, but I'm sure there's there's a ton more to unpack there. But yeah, it was a really cool one. Like I said, I mean, I don't even know like who this
That's the other
ARC
thing.
Hush
They're
is.
frustrating.
Yeah.
Ads, they would show up
Oh
and
yeah. Oh, ad blockers and all that stuff. Well, and that was one of the things that was kind of cool is that there was like so one of the examples that I was looking at with Puppeteer was showing how you like if you type into Google, right, it gives you the completion, like it drops down the completion or
yeah.
suggested searches, like
Mhm.
you can await that, right? So like you can like with Puppeteer, you can go to like Google, you can have it type into the search bar, and then await the suggested searches and pick the third one on the list, and then follow that, and like it was like really convoluted, like they were doing all these weird jump throughs with like the Google Dev site and like following, like pop ups that popped up on the screen and how you could like await the pop up and then work through
Yeah.
it.
At the end of the day, the ultimate web scraping tool is Google,
Yeah,
and you start there and go through the links.
yeah, that is the truth. It definitely is the web scraper of all web scrapers. But I believe Google even has a hand in Puppeteer, like in the development. I'm not sure how, but I remember reading about that somewhere that it was supported by
And
Google.
or if you want to scrape about the subject, you can perfectly start with a Google search.
Oh yeah. Well, that's how everything I get into starts with is a Google search. That's for sure. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because I'm pretty much done with this one here, and stop recording.